Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene. And today we're talking about...
having a good match between rules and setting, and how that equates to a great game.
And what's the first game you want to talk about?
Well, before we get into the game, I want to talk about why I think we mentioned this in the past, and we kind of danced around this subject, but I think it deserved its own episode. And we've talked about how when...
He says that because I told him that I think he already talked about this.
Yes. So we've said it before, or I've said before, that when the rules really mesh well with the setting that you're trying to invoke, that it makes for a great game. And there's certain things that could make it great. And I think there's certain games out there, RPG games out there, that really, I don't know what, hit the head on the nail as far as making the rules and the setting match really well, and it makes it easy to play. And I think that's what the important part is that when you have a system and a rule set that are, system and a setting that really match really well, and you're trying, especially if you're trying to invoke a certain type of feeling in the game, it really does work, and it makes for a great game. So number one on the list, even though I haven't played it as often, it's an older game. It's called Cthulhu. Now, Call of Cthulhu uses a RuneQuest percentage systems. It was a borrowed or adapted by the person who made Call of Cthulhu, but he made some changes. He homebrewed it's a percentile system. He homebrewed a bit, and because of H.P. Lovecraft's tales of Call of Cthulhu and how most of the people went mad in the characters in the stories, or a lot of them did. Not to say most, a lot of them did, dealing with the horridness of the subject. He had to the creator had to incorporate that into his game, because you can't have an investigative 1920s game dealing with Call of Cthulhu without including something to deal with the subject of sanity. And so he put in a sanity stat, and basically whenever you encounter something really horrid or supernatural, you lose part of your sanity. And as the character continues investigating this world of the Call of Cthulhu, your character might, and usually does, lose sanity along the way until the character is useless, right? You can't play that character anymore. And I think that's really evocative of the tales that H.P. Lovecraft wrote, and I think that's why, even though for the longest time I wasn't a Call of Cthulhu fan, I'm not saying that I am, but I avoided playing the game. I didn't understand the subject matter. I didn't understand the people who played it. They seemed a little strange. I was a very conservative-minded role player. We played D&D, and we didn't dress up to play the game like some people did who played Call of Cthulhu.
Wow, you're just hitting stereotypes there, dude.
I was very young, and when you're young, you have that. The world is a certain way when you're young, right? And then as you grow older, you realize, no, the world isn't that way. At least that's been my experience. So I was a rather rigid young RPG player.
You still are.
Well, what 1 out of 2 is bad. And so when I told you this is a story, when I first encountered Call of Cthulhu players, they seemed, just a little bit strange because they would dress up in 1950s attire, and I'm like, even though I'd like that,
I think it was really 1920s, dude.
I'm sorry, 1920s, right? And so the women were wearing these just dresses seemingly from that period, and men were wearing suits and fedoras and
things that you like.
Yes, I know. Maybe I don't know.
You were jealous.
I possibly was jealous that they were so
confident.
Yeah, confident in dressing up that it didn't matter what other people thought.
Well, it wasn't like they were dressing up in cosplay stuff. It was just kind of vintage clothing.
Yeah, exactly. But it was sort of cosplay-ish compared to us who were just in T-shirts and pants, playing in our parents' basement. I didn't have a basement, but you know what I mean. So it was weird. It was weird for me.
I think it was funny because you were both playing at the library, right?
Who's
Where
both?
the Call of Cthulhu and the D
No,
and
no,
D
no. This
people.
was the first time I remember ran into these people who played Call of Cthulhu was at Pacificon,
Ah,
and I remember this one particular tall. I don't think it was Matt. I don't think it was Matt, unless he dressed the same way that he did when he was younger. But it might have been Matt. I just remember seeing this guy. He was very tall and thin, and very. He reminded me of. I hate to say it, but that's a totally different 1940s or 30s. Was da, 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 da.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, right?
Well, then you were jealous.
I guess I don't know. I did like the clothes. I gotta admit that later on, as I grew up a little older, I go, wow, those are pretty nice clothes. And I'm kind of sorry we didn't grow up in an era of suits and ties and fedoras.
And what are we talking about today? Because you've lost me
And you lost it
completely.
completely. So I'm talking about a good match. So the good match in this at Call of Cthulhu was this adding the sanity mechanic to what is basically a percentile
System.
system, which is now called basic role playing, BRP for short. And they use that system for other games.
Isn't
But
that an old system?
yeah, from the RuneQuest. It's based on RuneQuest
Oh, from the 70s, right?
from the early 80s, but I think RuneQuest might have been late 70s.
I remember the letters because from doing research for something else,
Yes.
old role playing games or something.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know if I buy into your idea about the rules matching the setting, but Call of Cthulhu is I do think the sanity mechanic kind of makes sense because you're seeing, at least for me, crazy stuff going on, and then in like a D&D game or supernatural game, you would just go, oh, okay, well, I'll kill it.
Oh, that's a ghost. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a werewolf.
Yeah.
That's a Hunga Munga.
But in Call of Cthulhu, you're playing a normal debutante. You don't know what that is, or you haven't experienced that before, right?
And yeah, that's something that shouldn't exist,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're confronted with that, you're like, whoa. And so your world changes, I guess. And
You have to be really careful in that game. Especially Saul has to be really careful in that game because he'll say stuff that will cause other characters to lose sanity.
I was just telling the truth. That's all I got to say.
So,
That's all I got to say about that. So, yeah, right. Excellent utilization. I mean, like I said, that's something really simple. A simple, not simple, but a sanity stat really changed that game system and really makes Call of Cthulhu RPG evocative of the genre, right? It really does. If they didn't put that in there, it would have been just a regular investigative private eye type of game. But it changes when your character can lose mental facilities and go nuts in the game. And I think in the old days they would just take your character and say, okay, you're gone crazy and you're in an asylum. But now you could actually regain some of your sanity after being in the asylum for a little while. But you're never going to be quite sane or have a lot of sanity. So that's one. That's Call of Cthulhu, the sanity stat. So Chaosium, let's stick with Chaosium. Pendragon. Pendragon has its old combat system. It's very, what I would say, it represents the type of game that was made in the early 80s. And I think what sets it apart from other games, and I talked about before, is the traits and the passions part of the game, where depending on what happens during the game, you roll on this trait system, which has what is it? I can't remember it off the top of my head, of course, but it has like piety versus lecherous and stuff like that. And so these are like two opposing sides of the same type of trait. And at times the GM could for you to roll against your trait if you're trying to do something or you have done something. And if you fail or make the trait, then it causes you to act in a certain way. Now, this is very interesting because it kind of like takes a little bit away of your player agency, right? That now a die is dictating how you should play your character, instead of like just having total volition of I'm choosing to run my character the way I want to. These traits kind of push you as a player to play a certain way.
I think it's more that they rein you in as a player. So if it's
You could look at it that way.
Yeah, if it's piety versus or
Yeah,
lust versus what's the opposite of lust?
chase.
Chaste. Then, if you're playing the character a certain way and the GM's going, well, I thought you had a 10 or whatever in chaste, and you're playing really lustfully towards this person, so then you need to roll to make sure that or you need to think about what you're doing,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And the reason I bring up that part of the system is that in Pendragon you are playing a specific type of game. You're playing knights and ladies of the mystical or mythical world of
Author.
of King Arthur, and on top of that, it's basically set in the world of King Arthur, but through the interpretation of, I believe, so it is basically Sir Thomas Mallory's version of King Arthur. So with that,
I'm just gonna say it's an adjusted version of
well, no, what I'm saying is that is what the
the lore that it's based on.
right, right, exactly, and so or he's trying to. The creator of the game was trying to mimic, and because you're talking about a very narrow part of a world that you're playing in. It kind of does mimic these traits and passions, right? Mimic the trials and tribulations of these knights, because some of these knights do weird things when, like, for example, the main example I have is Sir Lancelot, right? Sir Lancelot was this fantastic knight, right? He was the best knight. He was the first knight. He was the best one of the best knights of the round table, and yet he breaks the trust of Arthur and has an affair with Guinevere. Now, why would he do that? Now, why would a player character do that? If let's say it was a player character and this was a
Because it was written in the book.
no, let's say it was a role playing game. Basically, Lancelot failed his lustful role, his lust role, right? And in this sense, or him and Guinevere, right? So that gives you that. What I'm saying is that this game mechanic, kind of mimics those kinds of situations where your character will do what. Let's say you were a really proud knight or whatever, white and shining armor,
A
and
knight in shining
a
armor.
knight in shining armor type of character, and you do, and then you always kind of do all the right things, but your GM asks you to roll a cruelty, make your true cruelty trait. So you act cruelly when usually you wouldn't. And so what I'm saying is that the system kind of mimics that world that Sir Thomas Mallory wrote in his style. That sometimes knights didn't do the right thing, and sometimes ladies and didn't do what they were supposed to do. There was a lot of horsing around. I use that pun loosely, and goofing off. So I think that those rules just fit perfect to that setting.
They make it more realistic.
Ooh, I want to say.
I mean, realistic in the fact of what people do versus the ideals of what they
That's
do.
true.
Even the way that it's written in by Mallory.
Right. When I was running that game and I was playing that game, I really liked it because it kind of helps you role play. It kind of helps you role play at night, and specifically at night.
Right, because I like that mechanic also because everything can go one way or the other, right? You can
Right.
either stay very honorable and do what you're supposed to do, or for some reason you need to take that thing, the finger of a saint or something, you have to have it.
Yes.
Suddenly something overcomes you and you must take it.
Yeah, and Sir Thomas Mallory and people who wrote about the Knights of the Round Table, the knights will have bouts of madness and go off running to the woods and do weird.
Well, if you think about that, that's called post-traumatic stress syndrome, but there you go.
I'm
Come
not
on,
sure.
they're knights.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure Sir Thomas Mallory thought he had.
No, of
He
course not.
thought about post traumatic stress syndrome, but they did have stuff like that, right? Because they literally
course.
have bouts of madness, like, well, I can't deal with this crap. I don't know, wow, right? And so that's how they.
It's like
explained it away.
any fighter who has to do stuff that you normally wouldn't do.
Right. So, like I said, I really like Pendragon for that. Now, I wouldn't play Pendragon for a modern mystery novel. I just probably wouldn't use it for that. It just doesn't translate. Though I guess
It would work well if there was a mystery that you wanted to solve with a bunch of knights that had to do it. And
I'm in like
you
1950s, like Sam Spade.
I'm thinking about like Father Brown Mysteries on PBS, where the priest is the one that solves the mysteries.
I think like maybe one listener has an idea what you're talking about.
I'm sure more listeners than
Really?
one.
Well, let's take a poll. I'm gonna open up a poll on our Facebook page.
Oh my goodness.
Have you guys visited? So again, I think Pathfinder. I think Pendragon is a perfect set of rules that match perfectly with the setting of Sir Thomas Mallory's Knights of the Round Table. And
I
that's what
I
that's
agree. I only have one problem with that game. The history is like not exactly correct.
well because it's based on Sir Thomas
I
Mallory's
know.
history.
I'm just saying that
I know, yes.
as
As a
a
historian,
so it just throws me off every once in a while.
did you like Paladin better?
Paladin is a little better with the history,
Yeah.
but it still throws me off. There's magic and stuff in the world, which during that time people did believe in, but in a different way then.
Okay. So let's move to the 20th century, at least.
The 20th century.
The 21st century, I guess. And that is another game called Alien RPG. Now, Alien is pretty modern, pretty new. I think it published two years ago. When I bought it, I think it was I pre-ordered it. It's made by Free League. They use their in-house or Free League's Year Zero engine. Alien, to me, is a really good mechanic. Use a really good mechanic. Like I was saying, it was a version of the Year Zero engine, which is basically a basic dice pool game, a basic dice pool RPG. But when they added they call it the stress mechanic, but we like to call it the panic mechanic because you get to roll on the panic table.
Because there are aliens coming at you.
And it mimics that very well, right? That feeling of the movie Alien or Aliens, where characters in the book, in the movies, get stressed out and they go against their training. Well, in Aliens, they go against the training. In Alien, they're just truckers, space truckers, trying to get to one place to another. And so those people are really not, prepared to fight or combat an alien.
I'm not sure anybody's prepared to fight or combat an alien.
Well, in Aliens, they were more prepared, and even then, there was too much for them. So I think the stress mechanic where you build stress, which we talked about this game before also, but I wanted to illustrate how well the rules fit the game, the setting, and as you build up stress, you do the idea is that you become more like focused on what you're trying to do. And I remember the part where Hudson in Aliens is they're under stress because they got attacked the first time, and half their people are dead, and they're like super stressed out. And then I forget who tells them, "Hey, calm down. You gotta." And then he goes, "Yeah, I'm on it." Right? He gives them an occupation to go fix something. So he's really keyed up, and so the stress not only gives you a chance you might freak out, but it makes you better. Right? Because your adrenaline is pumping, the idea that adrenaline is pumping. So you get that extra dice. You get extra dice as you build up stress. And usually you roll black dice, but the stress dice are yellow. And it could be any color, but you keep these two different dice pools separate. And anytime you roll, I forget if you roll a 1 on the stress die, there's a chance you might stress out, and there's a little table for panicking, and if you roll really high, the results get worse and worse. And the more dice you have, the more chances of you rolling higher. So it's this weird dichotomy where you're getting better at stuff because you get more 6-sided dice to roll with your dice pool, but there's bigger chances of you stressing out. And because if the more dice you have, that's how many dice you roll to freak out. So it is a really interesting mechanic. I think it really hits the head on the nail as far as...
You keep saying it wrong.
Hit the head on the nail? How are you supposed to say it? Hit the nail on the head. So I'll stop using that one. And it really does match up with what The genre is, and in this case, it's a movie, and the rules just like really fit perfectly with that, I think. And we play with this guy called Morgan, and he really loves it. He really loves that game. He says he doesn't know about the playing the long term campaign of Marines, but he says the one shots that he's played in and the ones he's run, he loves it because it reminds him so much of a movie. It's like this cinematic, really stressful horror movie in space type of thing, and he really likes it. And I can't argue with him. That is totally true. The Alien game plays like a really good freak out horror movie.
Based on the horror movie, so
Well, I don't. I guess I didn't realize it was a horror movie. I know back. Okay, now Alien came out before I was 17. It was rated R, so I was not allowed to see it, and my parents were very strict about letting me see R-rated movies. Though I guess if I was a more nefarious child, I could have snuck into the theater, and certainly my siblings would not take me to go see that movie. And I didn't want to see that movie. It's kind of scared that even the commercials scared me. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the commercial, but it was basically this weird screeching noise and the whole time, and then the egg cracks and light comes shooting out of this egg crack, and then at the very end it says, "In space, no one can hear you scream." And I'm like, I don't want to see that movie. The commercial freaks me out as it is. So I had no clue what Alien was about until much later, or right toward the end of high school, when I was able to get a VCR and I was able to rent the movie, and me and my friends watched it, and it was pretty gruesome for its day. It still is.
yes,
Gruesome.
the Augustine wanted to see it when he
Yes.
was a teenager, like
I
13.
think it was more like 10 or 12, wasn't it?
No, it was a little older.
Okay.
He was 13 or
Because
14.
we wouldn't let him watch it,
No,
but Steve and Kathy.
we watched it at their house because him and Alan wanted to see it,
Yeah.
and they were teenagers. So I go, you guys really don't want to watch this.
Then they really want to watch it when they say stuff like that.
But he left the room for part of it.
When that thing is going to come out of his stomach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we warned him about that, or I might have warned all of them about it. But he was very sensitive to that throwing up and stuff, and that probably wouldn't have been good. So excellent implementation of rules and settings.
That movie still scares me, and I've seen it a few times
It is much scarier than Alien.
because it's suspenseful.
Yes. It does raise your anxiety level.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's,
I think that the game does fit the system does fit the game in that one, because I think it's really cool because when you roll on the panic table, you don't know what you're going to get,
Yeah.
right? And it could be something easy, or you could be where you cannot move until the next turn, or until for however many turns. And that happened to me, and the artificial intelligence person, the company man is telling him killer. And I'm like going, I knew you were a bad guy. I couldn't do anything.
oh my God, that's true. I forgot about that. And what's weird is that it's the same system that powers Tales from the Loop, which is a completely different type of game.
But it works. The system works for that too.
Right. But it doesn't have a panic mechanic.
No.
Yeah. I think and I think that shows you how a little tweak or a little addition of a rule can really change the type of game that it is. So next on my list is Edge of the Empire. Now, a lot of people don't like the funky dice mechanic because you use all these funky dice. I kind of do for this game. I wouldn't use it for any other game, but this is, I believe, Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition, which came in a big box, had these funky dice. Now, I acquired the big box. I still have it in my closet, and I've never played it. I opened it up and looked at it. I think I got it at a garage sale or something, or maybe online, but I don't remember because it's pretty heavy. I don't think the shipping would have been killed.
Anyway,
So it uses the same system as that, which uses the funky dice, and Star Wars changes us up a little bit. It gives you different colored dice, makes it easier to distinguish certain dice from other dice. But ultimately, and of course, they cleaned up the rules a little bit. They added Star Wars to it, very cool. And
what?
they added Star Wars to the mechanic,
Oh,
the rules.
I haven't played Star Wars Edge of the Empire.
Right, and there's other ones. There's Edge of Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny, which represented.
I had my first experience with funky dice playing the One Ring.
The One Ring.
I still don't know what the symbols mean, but that's okay.
Yes, there's quite a few icons in that game. So what I like about that game is that because it could have the big deal in that game is that you can succeed and still have some complications, much like the 2D20 system, like Star Trek and Conan. But this precedes that system, and it's actually written by the same guy, Jay Little, I believe, is the author or the.
That is a really very good system. I like the you can succeed and still have a complication.
Or you can fail and still have something good happen.
Right.
The only problem is a lot of people have this problem with that system because the GM is constantly having to come up with things. I think people have
Every GM that I've played with a system like that makes you come up with your own success
that's
or failure.
exactly what the fix on that is that they say is that what do you call it? Distribute that work to the players, and if nobody can come up with something, just let it go.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Let it go. I think there might be some
Song?
song about Let It Go. Is it a Disney song? I never watched it. I think it has to do with the Frozen. Let It Go? No?
I think
don't
you're
know.
high. Whatever.
I might be. No, I'm definitely not high. Great system for that game. I really like it. I think it works really well. That is evocative of Star Wars and how things can go right and still be a
Things
little bit
can
wrong.
go right and still bad stuff happens.
Exactly. Yeah, I talked about that system before a long time ago when we talked about the Star Wars. This famous scene where Han Solo is starts chasing the stormtroopers, and he succeeds, right?
Yeah.
He succeeds. He succeeds in chasing them and scaring them away, and by charging them by himself against like 5 or 6 stormtroopers.
Till he turns that corner.
So he turns that corner, and then there's a complication. So perfect, very evocative of that game flow and stuff. I really like it. Really good game.
I'm sure there's a lot of other systems that have that match well with the genre that they're playing. Saul just didn't think of them. So
Oh no, there's tons.
so
I like,
if you have if anybody has any ideas or this hits home, that's because that's the way it is. A lot of times
Yeah.
there's mechanics and parts of the system that really help with the genre.
what's unfortunate is that a lot of these games, when you look online, as far as online of how much they're played, they don't get played as much as I'm gonna say the 3-ton gorilla in the room, which is D&D. You look, for example, Roll20 puts out a stat. I know people, not everybody plays a Roll20, but the VTT juggernaut, also the 800-pound gorilla in the VTT world, is Roll20. There's many other ones. A lot of people swear by Foundry, by Fantasy Grounds, all this other stuff. The information that you can glean from that is that a massive amount of people are playing D&D 5th edition with very little, and then there's very small pies left over for everybody else. Call of Cthulhu still ranks pretty high. I'm not sure how Edge of the Empire or Pendragon rate, but those are really smaller distributed type games where there's less people playing it. But I think if you can tear yourself away from 5th edition, these games hold a lot great RPG goodness in them because of the way the rules are matched to the system, and they really play really well. I'm gonna give it to D&D 5th edition. It is a great system for high medieval fantasy, and that's all there is to it. They've done a really good job doing that. But there's other games out there that equally, if not better, match the system to the genre, and it really makes for a good role playing experience.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene.
and you have a good day.